All right, everyone. I think we have at least the first wave of people in from the waiting room, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back to our series, Dynamics of Donor Development. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Carly Houchin, and we at the Sunflower Foundation are so happy that you've made the time out of your Tuesday, over your lunch likely, to join us for this exciting conversation. I'm going to turn it over to our content matter experts here in just a few minutes, but we have a few housekeeping reminders and grant reminders as well that I'm going to take us through first. So just as a quick recap, this series started with a session on creating a culture of philanthropy. And then our second session was on crafting your case for support. Those recordings are both available on the Sunflower Foundation website if you missed either of those or would like to share them with a board member or colleague. We're also recording today's session, so this will be available to share as well, both via a follow-up email and as a link on the Sunflower Foundation website. After today, the series will reconvene on April 21st with a session on discovery conversations and corporate development. And then we will wrap up on April 28th with a session on prospect research for small shops. Really looking forward to diving into the rest of this series and hope you all will make plans to join us. The registration information for each of those forthcoming sessions are also on the Sunflower Foundation website's learning page, where we have been posting the recording. And Anne, if you're able to grab that link at some point and drop it in the chat, that would be great. Speaking of the chat will be the primary way that we'll be taking questions. And the topic today is on donor advised funds. I don't recall if I said that. And that can get a bit wonky. And so I would say don't be shy in the chat box. If you think you heard something, but feel like it would be helpful to confirm your understanding before we move on, please feel free to chime in there with those questions. We'll pause throughout to clarify some of those. But to get us started, sometimes I think it's helpful to find the chat if we're going to use the chat throughout. So it should be on your screen on the toolbar on the bottom where it says chat. And if you could click on it, that should pop up a window. If you could add your name, your organization, and where you're joining from in the chat, that would be super helpful for us. I always joke with those on staff, I feel like we need to warm up the chat box. Like once you've sent one message in the chat box, it's easier to send the second message. So thank you for your assistance in warming up the chat for us today. If in addition to your name and organization, you'd also like to tell us a little bit about your level of familiarity with DAFs, that would be super helpful as well, just to get a sense of how this information is finding you today on your DAF journey, if you have one. So if you're brand new to DAFs, that's helpful to know. So we make sure we are taking time to cover the fundamentals. If you're familiar with the term, but not sure what it looks like for your organization, that's helpful to know too. If you're a DAF pro, but you could use some tips and tricks, that would maybe be another thing that could be helpful to communicate. Or if you're like a DAF super user and you're just looking to refine your skills or think through what it looks like for a specific project, that would be helpful context as well. So I see people are firing up the chat. Thank you for that. As soon as I stop screen sharing here, I'm going to take a look and read through those. But wanted to also provide a reminder at the top of the session that we have some donor development accelerator grants now open at the Sunflower Foundation. We launched these on March 24th, and there is a recording available if you missed that session. It's real short, probably about 15 minutes, recapping some information about the grants, and then we answered questions for those who were able to join live. My colleague Ann Zeitz is going to drop a link to that recording in the chat. And we're also happy to talk further if you have questions about these. We'll put our emails in the chat as well. But the purpose of these accelerator grants is really to take what Vickie and Brad have been sharing throughout the course of these series and give you a little bit of funding to be nimble and experimental, as you think about what it would look like to implement some of these strategies. So it's really intended, this grant opportunity is really intended to go hand in hand with this broader donor development series. These grants are small, just up to $5,000 per organization. Um, but the application is open through May 5th, with a funding announcement on or before June 30th. We covered this in the previous webinar, so I won't go into too much detail. The long and the short of it is these funds would be appropriate to use for experimenting with things you learned in this series, listed on the left-hand side of the screen. And then things that these funds are not well suited for are things like contributions to a major giving campaign or a capital campaign or other activities that are ineligible expenses for Sunflower Foundation. Again, Anne and I are happy to talk through any of those with you if more information would be helpful. Um, but I'll leave it there in the interest of time and instead call on, I believe our friend Candace from the Kansas Health Foundation is also online to tell you a bit about some support available from KHF. Candace?
Yes, hi everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to just jump on and share another grant opportunity provided through the Kansas Health Foundation. So we have our Kansas Innovation Fund, which we are now in our second year opening. They are our smaller grant opportunities up to $5,000, but it is a grant opportunity that we're glad to usually leave open all year round until funds are exhausted. It's usually open until about towards the end of the year, so about October, November-ish. And it's a great opportunity for organizations to be experimentative. It's a great way for you to be innovative at social change. And great ways to seed or pilot new ideas. So this is why we thought it was like a great idea to kind of probably introduce this grant opportunity along with the accelerator grant opportunities that Carly just mentioned. So this could be another opportunity for you to apply for. As you can see, a lot of its focus is around health and health equity in Kansas. It's got three main criteria. Are you benefiting a Kansas community? Are you improving the health of your audience or the community that you're focusing on? And is it a new or innovative project? And so when they also have a current priority alignment with our current issue, which is upward mobility, which is just seeing about any kind of idea that looks at improving a person's chances at living a healthier and successful life. So that could be anything towards improving, access to care, access to health, educational opportunities, workforce development, any social determinants of health that can help improve a person's well-being. And of course, our eligibility requirements, we fund any 501c3 nonprofits, but also government entities and churches. Again, you can apply one time per year per organization, but if you apply and you're declined, you are welcome to apply again. So just keep that in mind as well. It's meant to have a really quick turnaround. Most decisions are made within 12 weeks. There's no reporting requirements. If you're awarded, issued a grant, you'll receive your award letter. And like I said, we try and make sure that those grants are closed out within like that 12 weeks from applying. So yeah,
Very
yeah,
good. Thank you so much, Candace. Are you able to stick around for a minute if folks have a question for you in the chat?
yeah, sure, yeah.
All right, everyone. So if you have questions about the innovation funding support from KHF or the accelerator grant support from Sunflower Foundation, go ahead and direct those questions to the chat. Or Anne and I will add our emails here shortly if an email conversation would be more convenient. Okay, with that housekeeping out of the way, I'm excited to pivot to our topic of the day, everything you need to know about donor advised funds. Before I turn it over to our content matter expert, Vickie Mathews, I wanted to share my quick pitch on donor advised funds. I was looking through some resources that Vickie shares and links in her presentation here this afternoon, and I found two data points that I thought were extremely compelling. To me, DAFs have often felt like a kind of a black box of how exactly does that work? Surely that's for, only the most sophisticated, maybe nationwide nonprofit organizations. I think I have a sense of like DAF fear. But some data that I saw, and I wrote it down here, so hopefully I repeat it correctly. 77% of DAF grants went to charities where the donor had previously given. So that demystified for me of kind of like, oh, who has DAFs? Likely people that already donate to our organization. So that's not scary. Those are people we already know. And the second data point that was really helpful for me was more than half of DAF grants are given in the donor's home state. I had this kind of preconceived notion that DAFs were made to national charities or very sophisticated organizations, but knowing that more than half of them went just where people live, I think makes the case that we're turning over the right rocks and trying to learn about this giving mechanism as it relates to supporting Kansas nonprofits. You probably didn't need to know that organization or need to know that information because you are already here, so likely already interested enough in DAFs or not scared enough of DAFs to join this webinar. But I thought those were interesting, so thought I'd pass them along as we got started here today. But without further ado, I will go ahead and stop my share and turn the screen share and the mic over to Vickie Mathews. Vickie?
Thank you, Carly. I appreciate it. Let me get my screen shared so that we can start our conversation for today. And Carly, would you mind just letting me know? Can you see that? Okay.
I see it. It looks great.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, if you have been joining this series, and this is the third time that we're spending our lunch hour together, you probably recognize that my partner in crime is not here today. Brad, unfortunately, at the very last minute, was not able to join. But he loves this conversation. I know that he would love to have been part of it. And so if you do have questions along the way, there's a lot of details in what we're going to talk about today, a lot of follow-up to make sure that you all, especially those of you who are saying that you're new to learning about donor advised funds, if you would like to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to us. We include our contact information at the end of every slide deck and would love to talk about this. This is one of our favorite topics, which is why we keep coming back to it over and over. Now, that leads me to this second point that I wanted to start with today, which is if any of you on the call today, or those of you who are listening to the recording, if you were at the Learning Collaborative a couple of summers ago, what was that, Carly? 2024. I presented on this topic. So it was my goal today to make sure I'm bringing you some new content, but there will be some repeats just to make sure that we're all getting onto the same foundation. So I hope you'll bear with me, but there is some new information in here from research and then some new practical application tools and suggestions that I wanted to make sure to bring to you today. And thank you for your notes, Carly. Some of those things are really perfect to help tee up the conversation and some of the research that I wanted to share with you all today. So the topic is donor advised funds. Now, donor advised funds were first established almost 100 years ago. The very first donor advised fund was established at the New York Community Trust in 1931 to support arts, education, and the community. However, the reason we're talking about this today is not because this is a 100-year-old giving strategy, is because it has really become popular for sophisticated donors in the last, let's say 10 years, and the research will show how much they have grown and the activity has picked up in the last 5 years alone. Now, what are donor-advised funds? At the very core, they are a charitable savings account. Donor-advised funds are a mechanism for donors to set aside funds that are permanently restricted for charitable purposes into an account that they can then designate to a charity of their choice. There are no distribution requirements for donor-advised funds, which is where we get into a little bit of the debate around this kind of giving strategy. That feels very questionable and not very transparent for many of us, but I'll show you some data today to reassure you that people are using DAFs very actively, and it is not a place that money just goes to and sits and never ends up in support of some of your organizations. Now, some of the benefits of a donor-advised fund is that they come with philanthropic advising, especially when you think about local community foundations. That opportunity to work with a philanthropic advisor that really knows the community, knows the nonprofit organizations and which ones are run the best and which ones can deliver on their promises. That is a benefit for some donors who might be new to philanthropy and are looking for a little bit of help to get comfortable in where they would like to make a contribution. So that's definitely a benefit of using a donor-advised fund. They are also very accessible. Now, there are, just as with anything, there's a lot of variety in the marketplace when you're thinking about the kind of DAF that you can establish. But just to give you an example, you can establish a donor-advised fund today at Fidelity with no required minimum contribution. If you want to invest $100 in a donor-advised fund, you can establish one today just to get that started. In my community, I'm in North Texas. The Communities Foundation of Texas is one of the two main community foundations that we get to enjoy working with here. At CFT, you can establish a donor-advised fund with a $5,000 contribution or more. So there are different thresholds for different organizations, but the point is that there are very accessible solutions out there. Now, donor-advised funds are a tremendous source for nonprofits to consider. That's why you're all here today, is to figure out how to get in front of these organizations that have $326 billion invested in them. That's from a report that came out with 2024 data. So the number would be different if we were talking about today's dollars, but 326 billion is tremendous potential to support all of the organizations that you all represent here today. Out of that, 64 billion was made in grants from donor-advised funds in 2024. Now, there are 3.5 million DAF accounts that are making those grants. DAFs have grown, even in just 1 year, from 23 to 24, 500,000 accounts were established. So this is the right time for you to be learning more or for the first time about this strategy and how you can work it into your everyday work on behalf of your organization. Now, another thing that we're going to get into more detail about this, but I did feel that it was important to point out that the average gift or the average account size for a donor-advised fund is $91,000. That might sound surprising to many of you because of the stigma that surrounds donor-advised funds with a perception that they are for the uber wealthy. This data point proves the exact opposite, that these are giving strategies that any donor can utilize in a more realistic kind of way. So I want to give you a quick overview of how donor advised funds work. Again, if you've heard this presentation from me before, you know how much I love this visualization that comes from Donor Search. We did not create it ourselves, but this feels like the thing I always want to go back to illustrate how this works. So if you are from the very first step, if you want to understand how a donor advised fund gets established and operates, a donor decides that they want to establish a donor advised fund, and they decide where they want to establish it. That's called a sponsoring organization. That is a community foundation, a Fidelity, a Vanguard, and some organization like that. The donor then decides to put money into a DAF account after it's been established. There are a couple of very important things that happen at that exact point. The first is that the donor receives immediate tax benefits from that transaction. And also at that point, the donor becomes a donor advisor. And the reason that that is important is that a small percentage, let's call it 1% of control over those funds, go from the donor to the sponsoring organization at that point. That's when the donor cannot, with 100% certainty, direct where those funds will go. They have to make a recommendation to their sponsoring organization, who then has to actually approve the gift being made to their selected charity. While the funds are sitting in the account, they actually grow tax-free. So again, they got the tax benefit when they establish the account. And then one of the great benefits for donor advisors is that their accounts can grow when they're managed by another financial institution, like a community foundation or a wealth manager. They grow tax-free, so they can make larger gifts to the charity of their choice. Now, when they're ready to make a gift, they would recommend the grant to the sponsoring organization, who would then approve it and process the contribution. So I want to share with you a few other details from some of the newest research that is available. Now, I have done a couple of things in this presentation. The very last slide is going to be a link to resources. All 3 reports that I reference in this presentation are linked on that resource page, and we are going to be including downloads of all of the reports in the resources that are shared with you throughout this presentation and in the links that Sunflower provides after we've spent our time together today. So you'll have access to everything, and hopefully it's easy to share with anyone that you would like to share it with. So this slide illustrates the growth year over year in the asset base of donor advised funds. What you can see is that from 2020 to 2024, the assets invested in donor advised funds has nearly doubled, which is incredible to think about. Now, I mentioned earlier that donor advised funds are granting out at a very impressive rate. Now, I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the requirement on private foundations. They have to grant out a minimum of 5% of their asset base every year in order to maintain their status as a nonprofit grant-making organization. So what we see here in this report is that private foundations are paying out an average of 8% of their asset base in a year. Whereas donor advised funds, which have no requirement for giving, are actually outspending private foundations from a percentage standpoint. They're paying out 25% of their asset base. This is something that I'm constantly reminding anyone that I talk to about donor advised funds, is that yes, there is no requirement. And yes, there's a lot of debate around what it should be. I think there's a lot of validity in that argument, but when you look at the data, DAFs are outspending private foundations. Now, this is just a quick illustration of how donor-advised fund accounts have grown in just a one-year period. So in 2023, there were 3 million DAF accounts. In 24, there were over 3.5 million. So this is a strategy that is really picking up with donors who are very savvy and understand the tax benefit that they can get on the front end, and then combine it with being able to rely on philanthropic advising, or maybe just parking those charitable dollars for the right project or the right opportunity that inspires them. This is an illustration. This data is just a tad bit older, but is really good to see that there's always 3 major donor sponsors that fall to the top of the list. It's Schwab, Fidelity, and Vanguard. Year over year, those are the top organizations that are receiving investments in donor-advised funds. So in 2023, the top charity or nonprofit that received contributions was actually the Fidelity Charitable Gift Fund. $12 billion was contributed to DAFs held at Fidelity that year. You can see the top 3 here are Fidelity Charitable, National Philanthropic Trust, and Schwab Charitable. Everything in orange in this chart is a donor-advised fund or a sponsoring organization. Everything in blue is what's being referred to as an operating charity, an actual, boots on the ground, although mostly these are national nonprofits, but these are nonprofit organizations that exist to receive funds that impact the community through programming and grants. So let me show you this next slide to give you just a little bit of a different visualization. It's the same organizations, same data points, to show you that more money was invested in donor-advised funds in 2023 than in operating charities. This is why we're talking about this today. This is why there's so much chatter around donor-advised funds. And so it's my hope today that I help you to get more comfortable in understanding them as a foundation, and then starting to understand some practical ways that you can work it into your everyday work. Now, this is where I wanted to bring in some new research compared to the conversations that I may have already had with some of you over the past couple of years. So I want to drill down into a couple of additional data points from some of the research that is available. Most of what I'm going to present is coming from a national study on donor-advised funds. This one in particular includes data points from 2 studies. The top is from Fidelity. So they've issued a report on their donor advisors and their activity. They have really great insight into what their own audience is doing, what they like to support, what are the strategies. They understand that much more than some of the other reports. And here, what they're reporting is that 80% of the grants that are made from donor-advised funds include the donor name and address. Carly mentioned right at the beginning that, how do you know who donor advisors are? How do you know who these people are, and how do you get connected to them? Well, this is showing that 80% of their grants are made with that information provided when the gift is made. Another 15% include the account name only, but often you can figure out who the individual donor is if you have the account name. And then there's only 5% that are made anonymously. When I first started having this conversation, that was really the pushback I got from a lot of people several years ago is, we don't know who's giving these donor-advised fund accounts. We don't know how to connect with these people. And this data is showing that that's really just a small subset of this population. Now, this chart below is from that report on donor advisors and shows 4% is reported as anonymous giving. So you should be able to access that information for the most part when you receive any documentation with a gift. Now, another common question that we receive is, how do you know what's going to happen with the funds that have been invested? If a donor advisor receives that immediate tax benefit, They are permanently earmarking these gifts for charity. But how are we supposed to have any confidence that it will end up supporting any of our missions? What this study found is that 92% of DAFs have succession plans, especially when you're talking about your larger community foundations and those large national organizations like Fidelity, Schwab, and Vanguard. They're going to require that a long-term plan is put in place for those funds. So there's a tremendous amount of accounts that actually do have plans. And what they found through this report is that about 69, 70% include that they would be turned over to another individual or family. About 30% would be turned over to the sponsoring organization. And so that goes into a pot that's added to their asset base and becomes their discretionary spending out of that particular organization. And then some are combined, perhaps some of them will sunset and have other plans. Now, in this conversation, there will be a few opportunities to talk about, the audience of donor advisors and who you should be targeting and what kind of conversations you should be having with them. I included these two data points in here to illustrate the demographics of donor advisors. You'll see that if you're looking at between the age range of 60 to 69, 30% of donor advisors fall into that category. And below, they go into the actual generations. 50% are of the baby boomer generation. I bring that up because we're on the precipice, or we've already probably started, the great transformation of wealth that's happening as baby boomers are entering into retirement or in retirement already and making plans for their long-term estate planning. Any donor advisor that you are able to establish a relationship with is a great prospect to have a conversation with about planned giving and what is their long-term plan for their donor advised fund, and is there any opportunity for that to be directed over to your organization. As you can see, there's a tremendous amount of donor advisors that are in that baby boomer category that are really, if they don't already have those plans, are probably trying to get them in place right now. Last data point from new research that I wanted to share with you goes back to the accessibility of donor advised funds. This chart illustrates the average grant amount from donor advised fund gifts. And it shows that the majority were in the $10,000 to $50,000 range. So I wanted to show this to you just to help to remind you to get kind of familiar with what is the population that you're talking about. It is not the uber wealthy. We are not talking about donors who can only make seven-figure gifts. We're talking about people who can engage in your organization perhaps with an annual gift or a special project that is in that $10,000 to $100,000 range is a really nice expectation to be able to go into on the front end as you're considering working with donor advisors.
Mm-hmm. Can I jump in here with a question from the chat?
Yes, please.
So Tammy says, let's say I get a DAF gift for $50 from Joe Schmo. I send a general thank you, but for entering into our donor management software, do we put it under Joe Schmo or from whom the check came from, which let's say it was Fidelity?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tammy, and something we're going to get to in a few slides, but let me explain it now because it's worth going over a couple of times because it's somewhat technical. When you receive a gift from a donor advised fund, you should already be familiar with the difference between hard and soft credits and how they can be captured in your database. Hard credits are assigned to whoever wrote the check. Hard credits have everything to do with how you're reconciling with your finance team. Soft credits have everything to do with how you're managing the relationship through your development team. So what that means is the soft credit in this example goes to, I would actually say the soft credit goes to whatever the fund name is that is included in that gift. So let's say it's the Joe Schmo Charitable Fund. And then if you already have a relationship with Joe and he's in your database, you would create a relationship to link him as an individual to the fund name. And that's how you would enter that information into your database. And I hope that that's clear and a good the right answer that you're looking for. We'll go over it again if we need to.
Sounds good. Thank you. We also have another comment here from Elizabeth about recognizing tax benefits from DAFs. Would you like to respond to that now? Or I think that might be in a couple of slides as well.
It is, but thank you all for being so eager to get into the details of this conversation, because I want you to feel really comfortable with how to navigate these after our time together today. So yes, because at the very beginning of this presentation, when I mentioned, in our little infographic, the donor received the tax benefit when they invest funds into a donor advised fund. That means when the gift arrives at your organization, all you are doing is sending them a wonderful thank you for supporting your mission. That letter cannot include any reference to a tax benefit. Now, that's going to be reiterated in the documentation that you receive from the sponsor organization. So let's say Joe Schmo's donor advised fund came through Fidelity. Fidelity would send documentation with that gift that states, do not acknowledge for tax purposes this gift, but you should be thanking the donor in a wonderful way to build that relationship with them. And I actually have the handout for this session today has sample language for a couple of different scenarios that we'll talk about. And one of them is that gift language. All you're going to do is, if you have your standard language at the bottom of all of your letters, all you're going to do is lift out the one statement that says that this gift is tax deductible to the full extent of the law. You just lift that out and you still mention everything else that would be in that footer language. All right, I'm going to go through a few more slides so that we have time for questions. This is, again, some of that just real baseline information for who sponsors donor advised funds. Now, there's about 1,500 DAF sponsors in the country, and they fall into three main categories. There are national sponsors, such as National Philanthropic Trust. That type of organization exists to help to facilitate gifts to reputable charitable organizations, but it's on a national basis and is probably that kind of big overarching organization that Carly was kind of coming into this conversation expecting. There are also donation processors like Fidelity. I would consider Fidelity, Vanguard, and Schwab to be just a processor. They're not really going to know what's going on in your community. They're just going to help to make the gift happen. There's community foundations. That's going to be the biggest bunch out of this 1,500 bundle of sponsors. These are organizations that are defined by a specific geographic region. At the end of this slide deck, I'll have a link for you to be able to go to a community foundation finder. And if you would like to just double check who's in your community, you can go there to find the community foundations that are interested in the work in various different regions across the country. That's where we're going to really spend a lot of time talking about building relationships and getting in front of them and stewarding those relationships. There are also single issue charities, DAFs, that are established to support universities, specific religious organizations. One thing I wanted to point out is there are some organizations that might feel that they're bridging the gap between a community foundation and a single issue charity. It's really important that you understand how that organization intends to operate, and how they work with their donor advisors. So an example of that is here in Dallas, we have the the Catholic Foundation of Dallas. It might sound like that is a single issue charity. However, this particular organization has their own discretionary funds that are driven by specific guidelines that do need to fill the requirements of that are called to by their mission as a Catholic organization. However, they also sponsor donor advised funds. And even though the donor advisor might be coming to the Catholic Foundation because it is aligned with their faith and their values, there is no requirement that their donor advised funds have to support Catholic organizations. They can support any nonprofit that can be approved through the process as a reputable organization. And so, in this example, the Catholic Foundation of Dallas would be considered a community foundation for these designations. Now, who uses donor advised funds? By and large, this is a valuable tool for individuals and families. There are some private foundations that are starting to move over to donor advised funds just because it's easier from a back end perspective. There's less management that goes into it. Some companies are starting to use donor advised funds as well, especially when you consider that one of the strategies that they like is using a donor advised fund to do employee matching. That's one of the strategies that they've been using. Now, donor advised funds are also great for donors who are new to philanthropy and need a little bit of help from those philanthropic advisors. Those who are looking for an immediate tax benefit, who have some sort of liquidity event and they want to go ahead and get that tax write-off now and take the time to make sure that they know where they would like to be making their gift. It's also great for those who have complex assets. A community foundation is often able to accept. We have someone right now who has some very rare coins that they're trying to liquidate. That could go to a community foundation instead of a nonprofit having to handle the processing of a complex asset like that. And then I've also already mentioned planned giving prospects are usually in this group of who uses donor advised funds. Now,
Vickie, could I jump in with a quick question on that last slide?
Yes, please.
So Bethany asked if you could provide a little bit more information or maybe examples about companies using DAFs for their employee match program, if time allows.
Yeah, that is absolutely something that can be addressed when you are talking with a company. In fact, our next presentation is going to be on the discovery conversation process, and we're going to specifically focus on corporate relationships. And so this is a great preview into that. You will always want to talk to corporations about what are the sources of funds that are available. It's oftentimes there's maybe 2 or 3 pots that could possibly be supporting your work. And this is a relatively new strategy for companies using DAFs. So there's not a lot of hard and fast you can rely on this to be part of every conversation, or you should expect that they're doing that. I mention it because if it does come up in conversation, hopefully elevating it to this conversation today gives you an opportunity to know that you should ask more questions about that. Now, the one example that I gave is from a small local organization. I'm doing a feasibility study right now for a small organization a couple of counties away from us. And they mentioned that is the strategy that they use. They have a donor advised fund that specifically only does the matching gifts for their employees' contributions. That's highly customized to them, but we have started to see companies try to dip their toes in the water of donor advised funds. I believe because there are no restrictions on giving, and so they can completely control the payout rate. Now, want to help you to understand some of the things that you can think about on the front end. If you have not done any work with donor advised funds, how can you prepare to receive gifts from DAFs? First and foremost, you should make sure to update and maintain your charity navigator and GuideStar profiles. When a sponsoring organization goes to confirm that they can make a gift to your nonprofit, they are going to be relying on publicly available information that is found in 990s and GuideStar and Charity Navigator profiles. If you moved recently and haven't updated your mailing address, that is going to make the process of a check arriving to your nonprofit much harder. It could also impact your relationship with your donor. If they're trying to make your gift and they can't get it to be approved for processing because they cannot verify the address, that could draw out the process of what should have been maybe a 2-week turnaround for a check to arrive to you. It could take 3 months before it's all able to be sorted out. So you should make sure to include that information in your donation page, but you should also keep those sources current and up to date. You should make sure to also train your staff to talk about donor advised funds. I saw some comments when we got started, you don't really know where to start in figuring out who has DAFs. The easiest way to do that is work it into your everyday conversations, mentioning to people, oh, well, we've had some donors who have given from a donor advised fund. Is that something that you have? I think you would be surprised that there are people who are not thinking about giving from their DAF all the time. They might even forget that they have a donor advised fund until someone mentions to them that that is a way to give to their organization, and they remember that, and that makes it an easier process for them. Make sure your staff kind of understand what a donor advised fund is and be able to direct people who are interested in establishing one to some reputable partners that they can explore more. Now, when it comes to the actual donation process itself, there are a few tools that have been developed recently. They're all linked here. They're linked on the resource page as well. DAF Pay, DAF Widget, and DAF Direct are all plugins that go onto your donation page and help to make the process as seamless as possible for your donor to go from your donation page. They can enter in, my gift fund is at Fidelity. It'll take them to the Fidelity site and they can complete their gift through Fidelity without having to navigate all of that on their own. Now, I included a link in the presentation to the United Way of Kaw Valley. I felt that they had a great donation page that did a few important things. It answered the question of what is a donor advised fund. I think they used DAF Direct, so it had that widget in there to make a gift. And then it included the nonprofit's EIN number, the mailing address, an email address of a live human being that you could reach out to if you were having trouble making your gift. And then it had another section below that gave the donor an opportunity to notify them that they were making they were advising a gift to come. That helps to make sure that you are capturing all of these potential ways that communication could get off balance at some point. It notified the nonprofit that you can expect a donor advised fund gift to come from this advisor. This is my name, this is the amount, this is my fund name. Just helps to facilitate conversation between all of those parties so that you can thank your donors properly and recognize the support that they're directing to you. I also always recommend that you include donor advised funds in every single type of donor communication. And that's a lot of things that you might consider. Now, one of the handouts that I've included is language that you could toss into, if you have a little filler box in your newsletter with little reminders, really simple language of hey, by the way, we accept donor advised fund gifts. If you'd like more information, let us know, or make sure you make your next gift through your DAF. We also sometimes see a little footer go into email signatures. So there's some sample language you can edit and make it sound like your own. Always make sure that you include DAFs in ways to give. That's on your website, on donation forms, anywhere that you're talking to a donor about a gift. Make sure that you're presenting that opportunity for a DAF. That's one of the ways that you can help to uncover who has a DAF and how they would like to support your organization with a gift. Now, when you are receiving DAF gifts, so we've talked about hard credit and soft credit a little bit. Carly, I don't know if there are any follow-up questions on that particular topic. I want to make sure I'm being as clear as possible. So if there's any other questions around hard and soft credits, I'm happy to clarify.
I don't see follow-up questions on hard versus soft credits, but I do see a follow-up question on the tax benefit you discussed earlier. Would you like that one now? Okay, so Shelley asked, is the tax benefit once someone creates a DAF that they are not taxed on those funds once or forever?
The tax benefit is, let's say you establish a $5,000 donor advised fund. The tax benefit is I can write off that $5,000 in that tax year that I transferred money into a donor advised fund because I am permanently earmarking those funds for charitable purposes. I will never be able to take money out of that account and put it back into my personal bank account. So that's the tax benefit that we're talking about. Anything that is earned interest in the account once it's been established is not taxed. So I wouldn't really position that as a tax benefit. That's just a benefit of investing funds in that way. I hope that makes sense. Great. All right. So we've talked about hard and soft credit. Again, the one thing I would encourage you to think about is really, lean on your partner for your database. Go to their staff. Make sure that you understand their best practices for how hard and soft credits and relationships can all be linked together in their exact product. It happens a little bit differently in every single one, but you want to make sure that you understand how to do a hard credit. Again, that's who writes the check. How to add a soft credit, which I would recommend would be the fund name. And then if you know the individual donor and they're in your database, you can create a relationship between the individual donor record and the fund name. Those are all really, really important details for reporting. So once you have figured all of that out and have processes and procedures written down to consistently enter that data over and over again, you also want to make sure that you can extract it the right way and get the right report out so that if you do want to check in with that donor and give them an impact report, for example, you make sure that you're grabbing for Joe Schmo, you're grabbing his relationship to the Joe Schmo fund at the Fidelity Charitable Fund, and you're getting a full picture of his philanthropy. Now, we've talked about proper gift acknowledgement. That's also going to be one of the handouts or a piece of the handout that I've included is some sample language. You need to make sure that you understand what DAFs can and cannot do. DAFs can do a lot. They can help to purchase property. They can provide support for annual fund. They can invest in a capital campaign. They can even invest in your endowment. There's two specific things they cannot do. The first is can't pay for an event ticket. So this is not one of those that you can exchange goods or services. Because again, funds were already invested for charitable purposes and they cannot receive a tangible benefit for those funds. So if there is an event ticket, you would have to deduct the cost of food. If a meal was provided or some other gift, you would have to deduct that cost for that gift to be made from a donor advised fund. They also cannot promise future payments on a multi-year pledge. Another one of the resources that I've included in the handout for today is sample language that we have successfully used to document a pledge when the donor intends to fulfill it through their donor advised fund. The most important thing about this language is that it is taking out, there's kind of a quasi, this is a written legal document or legal agreement between donor and nonprofit when you're filling out a pledge form that you're promising to pay this amount by this date, and you have all of that set out. All this language does is indicate that it is not an expectation, it is not guaranteed that these payments will happen on this schedule, but that is the donor's intent to recommend a gift from their donor advised fund on the schedule that has been included in the pledge form. We've been able to use that successfully. This is an area that is often just a non-starter with many, and they just are not going to be, some organizations are not open to considering language like that and just won't put anything in writing. And so you'll have to navigate that kind of on a case-by-case basis. But those are really the two things that DAFs cannot do. They can pretty much do anything else. Now, I mentioned in reporting earlier, hard and soft credits and individual donors getting connected to that account. You should also consider in your database how you can capture donor recognition as well. Oftentimes, that would be reflected in the language that comes in the documentation with the gift, but it's not guaranteed that it always happens. And so following up with your donor to find out from them how they would like to be recognized is another really wonderful opportunity for stewardship touch points once you see that they've made a gift through a donor advised fund.
Mm-hmm. Vickie, can I chime in here with a question while you mentioned
Sure.
donor tracking systems, donor data systems a couple of times, and we have a question related to that in the chat. Maren said, we've been exploring various donor tracking systems. Do you have any recommendations for particular softwares or sites that you like for donor tracking and relationship management? Bethany mentioned that Bloomerang is excellent.
Yeah, there are a lot of really wonderful products out there. And normally, I don't really have a set recommendation because it really should be responsive to the size of your organization, the size of your team, how many donors are in your database, how many relationships are you managing. But Bloomerang is often a very popular tool for organizations of many different sizes. There is a relatively new product out there that's called Virtuous that has a lot of AI components included in it. It is kind of built as a predictive software that helps. It's not just the place to keep all of your donor notes. It's a way to help you to predict how you can take additional steps in that relationship to strengthen it with your donor and anticipate the next steps that you might be wanting to take. I've had several of my clients recently have really liked and signed on with Neon One as well. Those are typically smaller organizations in general, but those are some of the ones that have been coming up recently. When I first started in this work, Razor's Edge was the Cadillac of everything, and is just no longer the default solution for everyone for a number of reasons. But those are three great options, but can always be refined a little bit with a little more information on exactly what they're looking for and what their capacity is. But that's a great question. Okay, this is my last slide before resources and questions. So I want to give you a few tips on stewarding DAFs. I think that these are all really important tips for all of you to take back with you and consider as you are thinking about how you might want to work this into your development program. So first and foremost, I've talked a lot about philanthropic advisors and how that's a benefit for donors, especially at that local kind of community foundation level. And we always recommend to our clients that they build relationships with those philanthropic advisors. These could also include CPAs and wealth managers because they are also a potential sponsor for donor advised funds. And the reason for that is they are the gatekeepers. One of the benefits of having a DAF is that you kind of you have the opportunity to put a layer between you and, all of the organizations that are trying to talk to you about their missions and want you to consider a gift. And so treating the philanthropic advisors, CPAs, wealth managers as a donor, building a relationship with them will put you into a strong position. If a donor advisor self-identifies and says, I would really like to support animal welfare. If they already know you and your organization and are up to date on what you're focused on at that point in time, you will come to mind quicker and they will know exactly how either to connect you with the donor advisor or get more information from you to help make a gift happen. So consider those people as another donor that you should be stewarding in this complex relationship of donor advised funds. Now, make sure you also train your staff to follow up. So what I mean by this is, as an example, Brad, who isn't here today to tell you this story himself, but he made a gift to a nonprofit recently through his donor advised fund. And it was the first time he supported that particular nonprofit with a gift from a DAF and didn't let them know ahead of time. But then when it took a while for him to be able to confirm that his gift was actually received, because he had open communication with that nonprofit, he was able to ask them if they received the gift. And the name of the fund was not one that anyone would have really noticed otherwise. So he was able to explain to them that that was his donor advised fund. He made that gift. This was his intention. And it gave them an opportunity to ask questions and learn more. Well, why did you establish the fund? What are you trying to accomplish with it? That's a great opportunity to ask about planned giving as well. So making sure that it stays on your and your team's mind when you see that first time donor advised fund gift coming through. What are some of those follow-up questions that you would like to ask? And how can that help you to strengthen the relationship with your donor? These are people you should use all the same strategies with when we're talking about philanthropic advisors. You should invite them out for a tour, make sure that they have updates, send them your annual report. In our last presentation, we talked about how to write a case for support, including a one-page summary. This is the perfect application of sharing that one-page summary so that they know they can rely on that real quick overview of your mission that, again, they can share with the donor advisor. Now, all of these tips that I'm giving you on this exact slide are much better for your relationship with a local community foundation, local wealth managers. You should not try to do this with Fidelity or Vanguard or, those big national organizations. That is just not how that organization is set up to interact with nonprofit organizations. We have clients that get a call once a year confirming, is this still your address? Is this your EIN? They just ask real basic questions and the staff do their best to try to get a follow-up call and they can never get it. But then $1 million gift shows up at the end of every year because that is how the donor chooses to interact with them. And they're doing it through an advisor that's working at one of those big organizations. So if you are to invest your time in all of these strategies anywhere, it should be in that more local setting with your community foundation that knows you and knows your community and is invested there. And then I'll just share, these are resources that, again, they're going to be linked. So when you get the slides, you can go visit every single one of these, mention the handouts that I've prepared for you to be able to take back with you after today. And then there's one link in here, DAF Day, that I haven't really mentioned, but DAF Day is a relatively recent initiative, maybe 3 years old, that is similar to Giving Tuesday. And it's just a day to talk about DAFs and encourage people to give through their DAF to your nonprofit on that day if they have one and choose to do that. And so you can learn more through any of these links here. So with all of that in mind, I think that is the end of my slides for today. And Carly, I don't know if there's any questions worth going through. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Vickie. That was great. We have about 10 minutes left, so if anyone has questions, find your way to the chat. But Vickie, you should know several people are chiming in with thank you messages, and Jennifer says great information. Well, we keep an eye on the chat looking for more questions. Vickie, I do have a couple questions that I have for you.
Sure.
A few people, we have a lot of community foundations on the call, so a lot of like DAF super users, I would say. But then a few people did say that their knowledge level of DAFs was very low or totally new. So I guess my first question is, what would be a good starting point or first step if an organization would like to prepare themselves to accept DAF gifts?
Yeah, I would suggest two things. The first is to reach out to start local, start small, give yourself a win under your belt, pretty easy. Reach out to your local community foundation and just get a meeting with a representative there. Now, I would expect that community foundations that are on this call would agree with me that every organization operates a little bit differently. So there's not one particular person that you can rely on, this title or whatever. Just take a look at their website, see how their staff is organized. You're really going to be looking for someone who is who works with donor advisors. That's what you want. You don't want someone who's over grant making. You want someone who works with those account holders, so that, again, you start to treat them, they're the gatekeeper, treat them as the donor. Get to know them, understand what are your donor advisors looking for, how do you share information with them, how can I be a resource for you? You know, how often would you like to receive updates on what's going on at our organization? You just want to build that relationship with them. The second thing I would do is start to put donor advised funds into your regular donor communication. Add it to your donation page. Take a look at Caw Valley and how they present that information. Put it out there. Include a casual little mention in your newsletter, or just start working it into donor conversations just to kind of start to get more comfortable with it and start identifying who has those funds.
Our next question is from Bethany. She asks, can you talk about the pipeline of DAFs to planned gifts? How to talk to those donors about incorporating their DAF in their estate plan?
Yes, that's a great question. So this is admittedly something that needs that intuition from the frontline fundraiser. You need to be able to trust what you know about that particular donor and your read on the relationship. But if you see that someone has made a gift from a donor advised fund, might be their first or maybe just the first time that you're really digging into the data, there are a number of follow-up questions that you can ask with them, trying to understand what they're trying to accomplish with their donor advised fund, and if they have plans for what's their long-term plan for that fund. And then if you already have your boilerplate on maybe you have an endowment established, or maybe you have a planned giving society. Those are all great follow-ups to try to share with that donor through the course of the stewardship with them and follow-up conversations. So maybe they've made a gift and you want to make sure that they know, let's say it's their first gift, and you want to make sure they know everything that's going on at your organization. If giving through a DAF is on your ways to give, that should be something that's shared with them. If the fact that you can accept planned gifts, either through a planned giving society or an established endowment, that's all part of, that bigger packet of information that we sometimes call it a welcome kit with first-time donors. If you are, again, just putting the information out there and let someone kind of self-identify. There are also other ways that you can really try to target that conversation. So if you have demographics on your donors, you can drill down into the age range that you're looking for and send them more targeted communication as a group to say, we have planned giving society. Have you considered including our organization in your estate plans? And then at that point, donor advised funds, again, just become one of those ways to give through that outreach.
Thank you, Vickie. Probably last question, unless something quick and burning comes up in the chat. But I wanted to ask if there are common mistakes that nonprofit organizations make when it comes to soliciting donations via DAFs.
Yes. I mean, this is so complex when you think about what's the hard credit and the soft credit, and then there's the tax acknowledgement that goes into it. So yes, there are ways that this could go sideways. That's why having documented processes and entering data consistently is so, so very important. Now, a more sophisticated way of actually soliciting gifts from a specific DAF fund need reliable and consistent data. So here's an example. We do major donor proposals during 2 times a year here when we have major fundraising campaigns going on. And if we know that a donor has been giving through their donor advised fund, we will include that in their letter. So we will invite them to consider supporting that campaign at a specific level and ask them if they would consider giving through insert fund name here. So if we can rely on that data and we can see the giving pattern over and over, we will reference that for their future gift. And we will include in, on a donation form, especially if you send a hard copy proposal or packet to a donor, you'll have a paper form that says, do you want to give your gift through cash, check, credit card? That's exactly where you add donor advised fund. A lot of times you might have stock sometimes in there. That's where you include donor advised fund. So they're not actually making the transaction that day, but they're letting you know that they intend to advise that gift to come through their donor advised fund, and you can keep an eye out for that. So yes, there's a number of ways that something could go sideways. Really, the 2 things that I would say are absolutely most important is to not solicit the sponsoring organization. Do not send a solicitation letter to Fidelity or your community foundation, and making sure that you are suppressing that gift, that tax benefit language. That's probably the biggest hang up from the sponsoring organization side, is having confidence in your nonprofit that you can execute that accurately.
Yeah. So we did get one other, I think, really quick question from the chat. So I'll go ahead and pose that too. We have 1 minute left. This question is from Andy, and Andy asks, is there a certain time that individuals need to give gifts from their DAFs? We get several DAFs at the end of the calendar year. Is that just because, or is it end of year, or is that a requirement?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You're going to find more detail about that in the reports that I shared with you as well, if you want to dig into the data. The short answer is there is no requirement for a donor advised fund to give a gift by a certain time of year. They don't have requirements on distributions, so they can give whenever they would like to. Now, many people are just in that habit of giving at the end of the year. What they did find in the data is that the grants into the donor advised fund are heavier in the last quarter because you're trying to get that tax benefit. But the actual gifts coming out of the DAF going to a nonprofit are not as cut and dry because it is such a flexible mechanism that you're probably going to see upticks, but that's just because of the normal donor cycle than anything else. That's not because of any expectations on the DAF or the sponsor perspective.
Very good. Thank you so much, Vickie. Took us all the way down to the wire with some great information, great discussion. If everyone could join me in thanking Vickie for her time, we'll wrap up just by saying that we will reconvene this group on April 21st for that follow-up conversation on discovery conversations and corporate development. Vickie, I have noted a few questions related to corporate development in the chat that I'll pass along to you today.
Oh, great.
And then the series will conclude on April 28th with prospect research for small shops. Just putting one last quick plug in for the Donor Development Accelerator grants that intend to build upon this series, and those are due on Tuesday, May 5th. That is all we have today. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.